Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thought we'd do a little something different while the little guy's away at school. And, as you may recall, we spent a lot of time putting together the new studio. And while doing that, I started going through my book collection to bring a lot of them in here and, to sort of organize them and then, have better access to them. They were in kind of, hard to get spots. And I pulled out my Dungeon Master's Guide, and on page 224 of the best Dungeon Master's Guide ever printed, there's this wonderful list of inspirational reading. And I've read a lot of these books, and I'm going to go over some of them in the coming weeks. And, there's a lot of great books here, but, there's some books that I probably will never read. I came across a copy of this book that I forgot I had. I hadn't read it until just last week, and I really wish I would have read this book 40 years ago. Despite its title, The Dying Earth by Jack Vance, it's an actually surprisingly, it's a wonderful book. I really wish I would have read this sooner. This book was obviously so inspirational to Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson in the early 70s when it first came out. Not just for Dungeons & Dragons, but I really think that this should have been on the inspirational book list for a game called Gamma World. This could have been either way. I also think that when they were making the time-old, loved, schlocky cartoon called Thundar the Barbarian, they had to have all read this book. I'm not going to, give away any spoilers, but if you haven't read this book and you have it in your collection, do yourself a favor and read this book. It's really a collection of short stories that all connect to the Dying Earth and the other characters, and it's only 169 pages, and I was able to read this in the course of like 2 afternoons when the little guy was away and after dinner. I couldn't put it down once I started reading it. And there are, I believe, 4 or 5 other books in the series, and I'm in the process of reading the next book in the series. And it's not as good, but it was written, I think, 20 years later, and obviously things change just as I've changed from the time I wish I read this book back in the early 80s when I, would have had the opportunity, because I started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was about 12. And, I really wish I read this book back then. This book is so good that I would actually recommend, if you read books to your kids, especially if they're, between the ages of, let's say, 6 or 8 and 12 years old maybe, by the time they're 10, they're usually kind of over the whole read me a story, daddy. But I wish I would have read this to my little guy. And, if I had a little girl, it would definitely be a book to read. It despite the title, it's actually a really, I hate to use this phrase, but uplifting book. I really enjoyed this book a lot. And except for one word in the last chapter that's, not a word I want to explain to my little ones, you can easily gloss over that, because the likelihood that they'll go back and read this book, during their teens or anything like that, and then you can, deal with that. But, other than that one word, which, don't ask, I'm not going to tell you. If you got the book, you'll figure it out for yourself. It's not a, safe for work word, let's put it that way. But this book is really more Dungeons and Dragons like than any other book I can think of at the moment. I have thousands of books in my collection, and I'm going to start doing a little book review every week, just because, there are so many books that I've read that I would like to share with you guys. If you've already read them, cool. But, I have a feeling that, some of my, ancient tomes are beyond the scope of most people, especially with the prices of books these days, which I'll probably go into on a rant later on, down the road. But, if you can get this book for, $5, it's really worth it. It, like I said before, I can't think of a book that more encapsulates the entire theme and spirit and hopes of the original and best version of Dungeons and Dragons, that being Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We can argue about that later, but I've got just about the entire collection of everything printed for AD&D, and I'm not going to change. I'm an old guy, you can tell. There's lots of reasons to play the newer versions if you don't have access to the old versions, but they keep making new versions, and I'm a fan of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So with that being said, folks, you get a chance to read this book, do yourself a favor, do your little ones a favor. You won't regret it. That's a promise for me. I really can't tell you how much I wish I would have read this book decades ago, and you know what? I'll probably read it a couple more times before I'm no longer with you guys. But until next time, folks, thanks for stopping by, sticking around, putting up with an old guy's rant. We will be back with a regular video tomorrow. It's a craft video. And then I'm going to do another review probably on Friday, but an old RPG I think you guys will get a kick out of. So thanks for stopping by, folks. We love you. Good night.